going to go to Charlie in Texas, who asks, what makes a scientific theory properly scientific? I'm wondering if maybe you could elaborate on that question more, or what it is maybe you're specifically trying to drive to.
Howdy. Yeah, I can make some clarifications about that. So what I wanted to do is lay out some criteria that I think you guys will agree with about what will make a scientific theory properly scientific. And then I wanted to apply that criteria against something in particular. I wanted to apply that against the theory of evolution by natural selection. And then I wanted to hear your responses to that. I think that might be interesting conversation.
Let's try it.
Yeah, sure. I guess so.
Okay.
Yeah, so start with the criterion,
I'll just start out by laying out that criteria. So I take it that a properly scientific theory is going to have to meet a few criteria, one of which is going to be that it's got to be logically coherent. It's got to be falsifiable. And then this is the third one, but this is where I'm going to contest the theory. Again, it's going to be able to make predictions of novel facts, which are entailed by the postulates of the theory. So in order for that criteria to do that, the theory has to specify a mechanism, which explains the phenomenon that it's investigating, and the explanation can't just be a mere description of the phenomenon that takes place. And so my contention with the theory of theory of evolution by natural selection is that it describes a mechanism, but I don't think that it's a proper mechanism, because the mechanism can't distinguish between traits that are correlated with fitness from those that are causal with fitness, if that makes sense. Or if you wanted to talk about that a little bit before I go on.
Well, sure. I kind of want to back up and take it piece by piece with the criterion part. So there's things within that I feel like, and I don't know if you're necessarily just committed to those, but for me, there's something that should be said about foundational attestation, or whatever piece of evidence you might be using at a foundation to further the theory. It's going to be better, well established if we have multiple sources of attestation, right? Or multiple sources of independent access. So when we actually go look at the pre-existing experiments that we do in conjunction with the theory, we can constantly confirm or falsify that. But I'm wondering if that's something that you're willing to add within that criterion, or if that's fine with you.
So if I'm just to understand what you're saying there could be interdisciplinary ways of confirming the theory that the theory itself doesn't necessarily specify or isn't within its scope. So something like plate tectonics would confirm that the world is there could have been millions of years of evolution and something like that. Is that the idea?
Well, I'm kind of going more with the plurality of evidence, right? So if essentially I'm trying to get away from an underdetermined theory, right? So I don't if you have just a single piece of or maybe you're looking at data and it's very limited data, and there's examples you could say.
Oh, I see.
If you came across something and you say it's X and the other person says it's Y, right? If both of those have kind of a similar theoretical virtue and they both explain the same phenomena, it's going to be better for one of those theories to kind of multiply evidence that distinguishes one from the other, so that there's not this problem of one of them or both of them being underdetermined from the same set of data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand, but I don't know if that's going to apply to the criticism.
Okay, that's fair.
If I can give the criticism, maybe then we can discuss that.
Sure, yeah.
And then we can see.
Yeah, well, I want to ask Kenneth to make sure Kenneth has any issues on the first.
Yeah, part. No, I'm good. With conversations like this, my goal is always to simplify as much as possible, because our audience, there's a whole range of people listening with different understandings and levels of sophistication. So it might be helpful. I mean, if you're calling in to go, I think that there are problems with the theory of evolution. Yeah, just lay them out. Let's keep it as simple and concise as we can.
Because I want to distinguish a couple things. Yeah, so there's the evolution, which is going to be taken as a fact, and then natural selection is supposed to be the mechanism that explains that phenomenon.
It's a
So
mechanism.
I'm contesting the mechanism itself rather than evolution.
Okay. So you won't contest like allele frequency changes in a population. Like we'll just set that like
No, that's not something I'm contesting. I think
that-
that those are
okay.
descriptions and they're factual, but for a theory to be a theory, it has to be explanatory rather than merely descriptive.
Sure. Okay.
But I can lay out the I'll just lay out the illustration and maybe that might clarify, hopefully. So the illustration is this. Suppose there's like a population of organisms that have two traits. We'll just call it like T1 and T2. And let's say like the traits are coextensive, or in other words, that they're linked. So you only get the one when you have the other, and you only have the other when you get the one. So T1 is going to be causal of fitness, but T2 is going to be a ride-along trait that is not conducive nor detrimental to fitness. But even though T2 isn't causal of fitness, it's going to become as common in the population as trait 1. Because, as far as the raw, non-minded environment is concerned, both are equally fit and they'll both be passed on to the subsequent generations. And the reason that this is a problem for the theory in particular is because T2 is correlated with fitness and T1 isn't. But the theory and concept can specify a mechanism which can distinguish the traits that are causal from those that are correlated. And so the problem is I'm not saying that biologists can't make predictions. I'm saying that in order to make predictions, extra information outside that offered by the theory or that the theory can provide is needed. And then only then biologists can make localized rather than generalized predictions given an organism, its natural history, its ecology. But by then, the prediction's explanatory power comes from the outside information rather than from the theory of natural selection itself. Does that make sense?
There's a lot you're gonna have to break down. One, I'm not, extremely competent in genetics and things of that nature to the education I have currently. But Kenneth, I didn't know if you were speaking up in the middle there. I want to make sure.
It sounded like you said like distinguishes or decides. Like you're. It sounds to me like you're sort of smuggling in an intelligence, and I just want to make sure that that's not what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that you want to clarify that because I'm not trying to do that. I'm presupposing like purely naturalistic presuppositions.
So if you're saying there's
God into that,
okay. So if there's two populations, break this down. So there's two populations. You're talking about fitness.
Well, we can I'll use a concrete example, maybe if that might be more helpful.
Sure.
So let's say the population of organisms we're talking about are zebras. And trait 1 is an organ that pumps blood, oxygen-rich blood to the muscle so it can escape predation, and that's how it's causal of fitness. But then the coextensive trait, or the trait that's correlated with that, T1, is going to be something like the heart and makes thump-thump noises. And then thump-thump noises are just going to be a ride-along trait that doesn't neither detrimental to fitness nor conducive to it. It's just like.
Are you? I'm sorry. Are you suggesting that the sound that the heart makes would be a trait?
Yeah, I'm
not sure. I'm not sure about that.
I'm. It sounds like to me you're adding something.
I think it would be.
Well, okay. So
go ahead.
This is kind of. It's weird for me because when you say the thump of it, right? I don't know that that's something necessary in the predictions that's going to if you add that, I'm wondering what the novel prediction under your model is in virtue of comparing it to a current model that's making these predictions absent this extra assumption, right? Because it seems like if you add that thing and the theory doesn't need it, right? Wouldn't we just go with the one that's more parsimonious and just shave off this? Because I'm not seeing why that trait is even necessary for the theory's success. If it's just seems to me to be an extra assumption, I don't know what work it's doing, I guess.
Yeah,
the criticism is mostly. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I don't see what any of this has to do with natural selection yet.
Okay, the reason why, so the reason why it has to do with natural selection, right, is because we're talking about phenotypic traits. Okay. And so a thump, I'm being Granted, maybe like I described that in a deflationary way, but nonetheless, like a thump noise that an organ makes is going to be a trait of that organ, right? Like it's there are more traits associated with that organ of the heart, so it might be red.
Sure. So for the sake of the conversation, we'll just grant all this. Okay. So there are a number of different traits that are passed on. Where are we going?
So the thing is that I'm saying we can distinguish the trait. We or even the biologists can distinguish which trait is causal of fitness, right? And that can be tested. But the theory of natural selection, and this is why some people think I'm trying to smuggle in like intentionality or some kind of designer, I'm saying that the environment needs to have consciousness. But I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the theory itself, not nature, the theory itself doesn't have a mechanism to explain or that can distinguish between traits that are correlated with fitness from those that are causal of fitness.
I guess I'm not
biologists used. Yeah.
I'm just not seeing how the counter or the example that you use to counter that idea is of anything that's of actual concern or is like applicable to like what the point is you're saying, because it seems like I'm trying to visualize what that distinction is, but when you say like the thump of that, like I don't know why you feel the need to add this extra assumption into the theory when it doesn't need it and can make the predictions without it, right? I'm just like, and so if we could back up for a second, the one thing I wanted to say about the criterion, and that I actually have listed on a piece of paper that I wrote down, was parsimony. And then I just did like a quick Google search, and parsimony, even like, and I don't take Wikipedia as what it is, but you know, it even has parsimony listed under essential, or there's essential criterion, and then there's other criteria. And the last one in other criterion is it must be most parsimonious, right? And if we both agree to that, if we both kind of agree to that first part of why you called it, or kind of breaking down the criterion involved, I'm wondering if you do agree to parsimony, because then if you do, I guess you're going to have to convince me why we need the extra assumption of this like correlation thing that needs to be explained, and there's a chance I'm just not understanding.
But on an even more like foundational,
let me address that real quick.
Hang on, before you keep going, Charlie, I gotta ask you this, because like neither Mike or I are biologists. You know, we are not people who, like, evolution is not our specialty. So what I'm wondering is, what does any of this have to do with what you believe and why? What does it have to do with the subject of our show? Like, if you think you've got, you know, a legitimate criticism of natural selection, why aren't you right now talking to a biologist? Why call into a show that is about, you know, religion and atheism and belief? What's the purpose of the call?
Okay. Well, there's two questions there, so maybe I'll try to be brief with the first one, and then I can try to address maybe the relevance of why I'm bringing any of this up. Okay. So I agree that parsimony is going to have to be a criterion. You know,
no, we got to do relevance first, because we've got a half dozen other people waiting on the line right now. So just out of respect for the audience, out of respect for our callers, I got to have you get to relevance first before we keep going.
Yeah, I have to agree.
That's fair. No problem. So I think that it's relevant in particular because one of the things that for me, whenever I became an atheist, right, was evolution was one of those things that I thought like was in a secular explanation that didn't require God. And so for me, that was like one of the kind of maybe not necessarily justifying reasons why I switched to atheism, but it was one of those things that, you know, pushed me along those ways. Sorry, that's the cat, if you heard that. And so I was hoping that maybe if I can show that, you know, something like the theory of evolution by natural selection may not be the best explanation, and maybe like there are other explanations, not necessarily intelligent design, by the way, but maybe like a teleological explanation of why there's like self-movement in the universe.
Now I'm confused.
So that's why I'm trying to.
But now I'm just confused because if you're saying like and stop me if I'm wrong, but when people say that, I have a red flag kind of go up Like, if I'm arguing with somebody and I'm an atheist, like we could just say I'm just like demented, like there's things going wrong with my brain, my worldview is just wrong. Like we won't say atheism's wrong. We'll just say like my version of naturalism or whatever is just wrong, right? Or what I think about evolution is wrong. Like I can just grant that, because it's like saying my TV doesn't work, and then you're like, yes, your TV doesn't work. That's why my TV does work, right? Like there's no causal connection between those two things, right? They have all their work ahead of them. When I go to turn my TV on, that work is just solely based upon the work that's involved there. And it's not related causally to the other thing. But so when someone says like, I find this flaw, I agree. There might be some other explanation. It's first to say science is provisional. It's not making claims of absolute truth. There could be a better way of determining the mechanism for evolution. We could just grant that, right? We could just give that out. But to go to like intelligent design or these things, I mean, we could just postulate anything we want there, because you're going to have to do the work. Otherwise, like it's just stating something as an alternative. And if I can't get off the ground beyond that, then I just don't know how to take it seriously. And in virtue of the other one being broken, it doesn't mean yours now works, right?
Yep.
So that would be my fear of raising
That's a fair thing to say. That's a fair thing to say, and I actually would agree to that, right? But if your TV is broken, then it's still broken. So that doesn't necessarily mean mine is not, but that just means that there are other options available to you, right?
Well, sure. So I'm gonna have a position where, right, like I don't take a position that we have absolute truth. I'm also somebody, if you get into philosophy and you get into like definitions of knowledge, like JTB, I'm someone that cites things like Gettier cases, right? I'm very skeptical of knowledge. I'm very skeptical of moral facts. I'm very skeptical of a lot of things, right? So for me to admit that we might not have the answer of what we think that's provisional or tenable that is working currently might not actually be the true descriptions of the world we live, like I've already accepted that. I've swallowed that pill. But I have reasonable certainty in terms of it being applicable in my life, or making novel predictions that we can use. Like I don't have to worry about certainty to know that my grandmother is benefiting off of a science of medicine, right? And it doesn't matter if like our theories involved there are perfect, right? It still benefits and it still has application in our lives.
Well, it seems like what you're saying there is that you're setting goals, and seems like your goal is you're satisfied with maybe like instrumental truth, or you're satisfied with things that you can know like things that are reliably true, or things that are like or just having justified beliefs within like the realm of maybe science. But I don't want to attach labels to you or whatever.
Sure.
It seems like that's what you're saying. But if someone's like goal is to say, well, I want capital T truth, and I want to see if there's a way of getting there, I think that that's going to be more from where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah, well, I think everybody's wanting to get there. It's having some epistemic humility, right? It's trying to decide and go, well, like maybe part of the situation that I'm kind of thrown into being part of the universe is that because I'm not the phenomena at which I experience, right? Like those are independent, those are different than me, right? If I'm trying to explain some phenomena, then we're always going to be blocked off necessarily because we aren't that thing. We're trying to constantly like break it down until we get. I just think that type of expectation is failure from the start, because I think we're just necessarily limited. But I don't know, Kenneth, if you want to.
No, I mean, like, wanting capital T truth is all well and good. I want a lot of things. It doesn't mean I'm going to ever get them. You know what I mean? I just kept thinking with everything that you were saying, Charlie, that, we could just say, okay, evolution's completely bogus. And that wouldn't get us anywhere closer to an explanation for, anything. It just would be, one candidate explanation being off the table. And then like Mike said, we'd still have all our work ahead of us. So I think, that's probably a good lesson from this call,
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we can end it there if you guys like, but I just wanted to make a clarification. before we ended the call.
Of course.
So it's kind of like a really subtle kind of criticism of the theory. So it's not like it comes from an atheist philosopher, Jerry Fodor. And so he's like, he's not saying, he takes evolution to be a fact. He even thinks that Darwin is getting at like something that's descriptively true. He just doesn't think that it has like proper explanatory power, you know? And so maybe for the sake of the audience or whatever.
Well, I think that's actually a really good point for you to call back in on. That's something that I would definitely like to dispute with you in the future on a future show if you'd be willing to do that.
Yeah,
we got a lot of callers.
We'll put a pin in it for now, but yeah, you're more than welcome to call back anytime.
Yeah, and Charlie, thank you. I really appreciate how cordial you've been, and you're a good interlocutor, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks. Thank you.